There's a strange kind of pain that doesn't come from failure, heartbreak, or even loss. It comes from clarity, from seeing something too early, before the world is ready. Before you're ready. That's what I call the timeline effect. Imagine this. You have a vision, an insight, a glimpse into what could be. It's so vivid, so real, that it feels like prophecy. A future relationship, a business idea, a societal shift. You know it's coming, or at least it should come. But then you look around and no one else sees it. They're living in a different timeline, one that moves slower, one that's stuck. And you start to feel like you're not gifted but cursed. Because what do you do when the future is whispering to you, but the present is screaming back in denial? We've all felt it at some point. You see the cracks in a job long before everyone else does. You feel the end of a relationship before the other person even suspects anything is wrong. You sense a cultural collapse, an emotional shift, a deep moral truth that no one else is talking about. And if you say it out loud too soon, people look at you like you're the problem. You're called negative, dramatic, unstable, overly intense. But you're not wrong. You're just early. And being early is often indistinguishable from being wrong. That's the tragedy. Not because the insight is flawed, but because the timing is. This is the timeline effect. It's when the mind and soul travel faster than the moment. And unless you learn how to carry that gift wisely, it can destroy your sense of belonging, identity, and even reality. Think about the prophets of history, the visionaries, the artists, the reformers. Many of them were ridiculed, imprisoned, exiled, or worse. Not because their visions were false, but because they were unbearably true. And truth, especially early truth, is threatening. People don't want to see what they're not emotionally equipped to process. So if you're the one who sees it first, you become the mirror they're desperate to shatter. And here's the terrifying part. When everyone around you denies what you know to be true, you start to doubt yourself. You start to think maybe you're broken, maybe you're delusional. Maybe you should just shut up and fit in. But what if instead of doubting your vision, you learn to honor the timeline? What if your role isn't to force the future into the now, but to become the bridge between what is and what could be? That requires patience. Not passive patience, but active stewardship. Because seeing the future too soon is like holding a flame in a world soaked in gasoline. If you move too fast, you burn everyone, including yourself. But if you move with wisdom, you can light the path forward. The pain that comes from the timeline effect isn't just isolation. It's the pressure of holding something sacred that no one else understands yet. And that's not a curse. That's initiation. It's a test of your integrity. Will you distort the vision to make it more palatable? Will you rush it and watch it collapse under immaturity? Or will you carry it with reverence, even if it means walking alone for a while? That's the deeper question here. Not just what do you see, but who will you become in response to what you see?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
So let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it. What truth have you seen that the world isn't ready for yet? And what are you doing with that truth? Are you suppressing it to avoid judgment? Are you shouting it so loudly that it alienates everyone? Or are you cultivating it quietly, steadily, like a gardener waiting for spring? Because if you can learn to hold vision without demanding immediate validation, if you can live in a future the world hasn't caught up to yet, you don't just become a thinker, you become a timeline architect. And that's where the power begins, not in being right, but in being ready. Ready to guide others when they finally start to see what you saw all along. A burden of knowing, how to stay sane when you're ahead of your time. There's a weight that comes with knowing, especially when you know something before it becomes obvious to everyone else. It's not just intellectual, it's existential. You walk through your days feeling like you're living in a parallel reality. People talk about what's happening now, but your mind is 5 steps ahead. You're not trying to be arrogant or prophetic, it just happens. You sense where things are going. You see what others don't. And while that might sound like a superpower, it can be psychologically destabilizing. Because when the world refuses to match what you know to be true, you start to feel out of sync with reality. You start to feel like you're the glitch. And if you're not careful, that disconnect can lead to isolation, depression, or even a kind of spiritual numbness where you stop trusting yourself altogether. Think about it. When you're ahead of your time, you're constantly living in a state of mismatch. Your inner timeline is racing ahead, but the external world is slow, confused, or worse, hostile. And that friction creates a kind of tension in the soul. You want to act, to speak, to intervene, but every time you try, you're met with blank stares or resistance. So you retreat. You go quiet, not because you're unsure, but because you're exhausted. And that silence starts to feel like safety. But it's not really safety. It's self-abandonment. And over time, it chips away at your confidence. That's why staying sane when you're ahead of your time requires more than just endurance. It requires inner anchoring. You have to ground yourself in something deeper than recognition or agreement. You have to trust your alignment, even when there's no applause. So how do you do that? How do you preserve your clarity without letting it destroy your peace? The first step is to stop expecting immediate validation. Vision is often lonely by design. If everyone could see what you see, it wouldn't be vision. It would be memory. You're not ahead of your time because you're better than others. You're ahead because you're tuned in. You're receptive. You're listening to signals most people haven't even noticed yet. And that sensitivity is both a gift and a responsibility. You don't have to force others to see what you see. You just have to embody it. Live it. Walk it. Let your life become the evidence. Because when the future finally arrives, people won't remember what you said. They'll remember how you stood, in the silence, in the waiting, in the integrity it took to not compromise your vision just to feel less alone. And here's something most people never tell you. Being early doesn't mean you've missed your moment. It means your moment hasn't arrived yet. And that distinction is everything. It's the difference between burnout and breakthrough, between despair and preparation. Some of the greatest minds in history were dismissed in their lifetimes only to be celebrated generations later. But they didn't wait for applause to validate their path. They knew that truth operates on its own schedule, that timelines are not always synchronized, that the world catches up when it's ready, not when you're ready for it. So I ask you now, what are you willing to carry, even if it takes years to be understood? What vision are you willing to protect, even if no one sees it but you? Because if you can hold it with care and not urgency, with humility and not ego, then you're not just ahead of your time, you're in service to it. How to lead the present with a vision from the future. At some point, you realize that being ahead of your time isn't about waiting for the world to catch up. It's about building the bridge between where we are and where we could be. That's where your power lies, not in yelling at the world for being behind, but in guiding it forward with patience, clarity, and conviction. This is the final evolution of the timeline effect. Transformation from visionary to translator. You start to see that your role isn't just to see the future, but to make it accessible, to whisper it in words people can understand, to show it through your actions, to live it so others can feel what they're not yet ready to think. And that's hard, because it requires you to live in two timelines at once, the reality of the now and the potential of what's coming. That tension is sacred. It's what gives your presence weight. It's why people start to listen, even if they don't fully understand you yet. But here's the secret that makes it all worthwhile. When you learn how to lead from the future without abandoning the present, you don't just survive the timeline effect, you transcend it. You stop waiting for the world to validate your vision, and instead you become the invitation for others to rise. You create spaces, ideas, art, businesses, relationships that reflect a future that feels inevitable once it's seen. That's how revolutions begin, not with mass consensus, but with one person who sees clearly, lives honestly, and refuses to dim their light to make others comfortable. So the question is no longer, can I be understood? It becomes, can I stay faithful to what I know is true, long enough for others to feel it? That's leadership. Quiet, often invisible, rarely praised, but world-changing. So if you've seen something, really seen it, don't let the silence around you convince you it's not real. Don't rush it. Don't shrink it. Don't scream it into a void. Live it. Let it shape you. Let it become your compass, even when no one else sees the direction. Because eventually, the world always catches up to the truth. The only question is, will you still be standing when it does? Will you have the courage to hold the vision, to build the bridge, to walk the path first so others can follow? If so, then you're not just ahead of your time. You're exactly where you're meant to be. And in a world terrified of change, you are the timeline, you are the signal, you are the future, arriving now.